All right. We are going to look at this starting with the first point on a glad heart versus a heavy heart. And then the next part on friends and neighbors we'll pull in. But there's a lot of cross between them, if you will. There's a good bit of information that helps with one in the other point. And I just decided ultimately to put the one on a glad heart and a heavy heart first, because I thought that worked out a little bit better. On this first point, a glad heart is good medicine. Can I have somebody read Proverbs 17, chapter 17, verse 22? Anybody there? Okay, Matt. And then chapter 18, verse 14. Okay, DJ. Matt, go ahead on chapter 17, 22. Okay. And then 18:14.
The spirit of a man will sustain him in sickness, but who can bear a broken spirit?
Okay. Go down to the questions, because the first two questions deal with these points. Number one, on that last one of 18:14, what has a part to play in our healthy well-being? What is it that it talks about there? Okay. When you look at the passage that is given there in chapter 18 and verse 14, pardon me, I've got to get this thing to show up first. Oh well. Like most things, it's great when it works, it's terrible when it doesn't. And that's what's happening to mine right now. Let me get over there. Proverbs 18 and verse 14. The spirit of a man will sustain him. In other words, there's an enduring quality that comes in the case. It says the spirit of a man will sustain him, but in his infirmities, but a broken spirit who can bear. So that kind of a spirit that is of a glad heart, or one that is a spirit of willingness of that which is of good, it'll make things to be bearable in getting through. Not that it'll make them disappear, but that's the point, it seems to me, from this in the book of Proverbs in this case, is that it'll at least sustain, allow that one to go on. When one is of a downward spirit, everything's going to be negative and bad. What happens when they get sick?
They struggle.
All right. What's that just done? That's affirmed what I've thought all the way anyway. I'm going down, it's terrible, and everything's a bummer, and that's going to make things even worse. That spiral that comes from that. And I think we're aware of that in most things, that in fact that is very true, that in these kind of cases, that mind has something to do with our well-being. On that second one, is there any scripture to suggest that our disposition can help overcome bodily infirmities? That's in chapter 17, verse 22 that Matt read. What is the point there? A merry heart does good like what? What does medicine do? All right, it helps, it heals, it makes things bearable or less of a problem. But a broken spirit dries the bones. If you've really got dry bones, you're in trouble. That's called dead. But what does it mean by dry bones? That's an expression that would be used. We don't use that one very much. But you have that sense that everything's just frozen, that it's kind of an in-place matter, that there's nothing that's really flexible and all. And that gives that sense of there being the pain, or the sense of one that's not working, a body that's not functioning, well. And that's what happens with that downward spirit rather than that merry heart, as it talks about. Anybody there? Any questions? Go ahead.
I think this merry heart that's doing good is like they know the end game, the eternal, and that this is temporary, and so they look at it that way and smile through their pain.
Yeah. Surely that's a part of it. That is there, that they recognize there's good to be had. It's the old question, whether we're a half full or a half empty kind of person, in a lot of ways. That you can look at things and there's good to be seen at any time. Question is, do we look at that or do we look at the other as being predominant, plus the fact of what's coming down the line, as Lisa pointed out, in the ultimate sense of a heavenly home. That's a recognition of something that we ought to always have an upbeat spirit, a glad heart about. All right, anything else there? Go ahead, Larry.
Although it doesn't really hit on it directly, I know from everything I've seen that people that are in dire survival situations, life or death type situations, not giving up is everything.
That's right.
People that give up usually will succumb to whatever the situation is, and people that don't give up. And so, of course, if you have a merry heart, you're kind of at the next level, I'd say.
I remember seeing my mom when she was just before her 90th birthday. We were going to have a big blowout for her 90th birthday, have folks in and out. But she broke her hip and went in there and got that hip mended and everything. And we were wondering, how's she going to do? She's 90 years old. She did well through the surgery, everything else. Went over to rehab. And she amazed everybody over there at Jim Thorpe rehab, because she just had a cheerful spirit. They said, I think it's her attitude that made her well, in a lot of ways. And I thought, that's amazing for her. And then, lo and behold, it wasn't a couple of years before I had my hip replaced, and I wasn't near as good a spirits as she was. And I was a lot younger. But at any rate, it was something that no doubt had a help for sure. All right, let's look at this next one. Break it down into the first three. Proverbs 12:25, Blaine, if you'll read that one. Proverbs 15:15. John, okay. And Proverbs 15:30. Anybody? Go ahead, Doug. All right. Proverbs 12:25.
Anxiety in a man's heart weighs it down, but a good word makes it glad.
Okay. And then chapter 15, verse 15.
Life is always hard for the poor, but the right attitude determines their party.
Okay. What version do you have?
I clicked on the wrong version.
Oh, okay. Let me get that one on the New King James. All the days of the afflicted are evil, but he who is of a merry heart has a continual feast there, or party. That's a pretty good summation. All right, verse 30. Who has that one, Doug?
The light of the eyes rejoices the heart, and a good report makes the bones healthy.
Okay. So what do you notice about these three? What's that which makes for a glad heart as far as these are talking about? In chapter 12:25, for instance. Did it again. Chapter 12:25, if one has an anxiety or a heart of worry is literally the idea, then what comes from that? What's the result?
Weighs it down.
Okay, it weighs it down, or there is that depression that is in there. When you look at the other side of that, but a good word. Now, typically in the Proverbs, when this statement, this phrase is used of a good word, it's a word that is of a commendable nature. Not necessarily one is being commended themselves by this, but it is a word that is of a good form. In other words, it comes from God. It's that which ultimately has a nature of good about it. What does it do? It makes glad. Well, why? Does that say every truth of the Bible then is going to make somebody glad when they hear it? Might not if they have what kind of heart within. If I like the lie better than the truth, am I going to be happier here to hear the lie or the truth? I'll be happier to hear the lie. But if I have my heart fixed on what is good, what's right, and I hear that which is good and right, then what happens from that point? What do I realize about it? It has a quality that's there to give life, doesn't it? It has a quality to make things better because it's from God. That which is false or evil, does that ever make anything better? I can lie to somebody about the way that they are, and if it's a lie and I make them better for a little while, they are all charged about that, built up, but the fact is, I've just told them a lie and they're still in the same problem. Is that a good thing to do for them? Well, no. And that's the point that the Proverbs are making here about a good word to be had. In chapter 15 and in verse 15, you find that statement made about the afflicted. The days are evil to the afflicted, but he whose a merry heart has a continual feast. Why does your heart or your attitude make that much difference?
How you look at things.
Okay. If we recognize this as all the days of the afflicted, that word is an interesting one too. You might want to look up as far as just doing a study of a word. It has to do with something that's of a disputed matter. It's something that is unsettled, I guess you would say. That's the way in which it is typically used in this sort of a sense. Well, when I look at something that is a way that's unsettled or not really what is going to be productive of good, then when I go after that, then what's the end of that? The end of that's evil. And that's the point that he's making. We tend to read that afflicted in the view of, and I had always until I looked at it today, had always seen that as something where one was afflicted, having trials, problems, circumstances that were difficult in this life. I thought that's what he was talking about. However, I don't think it is now. I think it has to do with something that we spend our day in that which is without known good. It's questionable. It's having something that's in that margin. It's not going after that which is right. However, the one who has a merry heart, a heart of good in this particular case, a heart that is bolstered by good is the idea. That one has a continual feast. Why? That he always feels like everything's great? No, because it is better. Because of the following after good, not following after that which is of a marginal or questionable kind of an end. If he can be sure that it is of good and he's following that, then there's a feast that comes from that because he's feasting on good and learning in that. He's sustained there. Is that, anybody got any questions, comments there? Go ahead.
It reminds me of Paul in Philippians, whatever state he was in.
You'd learn to be content, That's right. And recognizing the fact that he was in a jail cell right now is actually profitable because the gospel is being brought to those who otherwise that it could not be brought to. Verse 30 then, the light of the eye rejoices the heart. That kind of seeing, a path that is according to what is there. The light of the eye simply means that there's something illuminated. They're seeing the reality of things. And a good report, here's that word again, of a good word or a good report, makes the bones healthy. Now, here I think it is talking about, it's the same sense of a good word that is pointed out. But I think it is talking about a good report of that person. In other words, there's a statement made about this one that he did right, or that what he did was commendable. And in that sort of a way, he says, if one's commended in that way for good, then his bones are healthy. You read in the Old Testament a lot things about their bones being dry, or their bones being good, or their bones being healthy. We don't think of those kind of terms too much. I don't sit around contemplating my bones a lot and whether they're healthy, but how would you put that in your own way? What would you use as a kind of a statement there? Talking about overall, I'm healthy, all of these kind of things. In the Bible, the idea of bones, what's down at the most center part of your body? Well, every part of your body at the center of it has what? Has bones there. And if those are not something that are sustaining you, if they're not ones that are good, if they're not malleable and doing what they're supposed to be doing with an ability to both move and to have strength, then your body's not going to be doing well either. And that's the concept that's here. The innermost man, if you will, would be a way that we might say that. All right, anything else there? Anybody? In the next two, chapter 16 and verse 24. Who wants to take that? Aaron, if you'll take that. And then chapter 20, let me see. Chapter 25 and verse 25. Okay, Tyler. 16:24.
Pleasant words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the bones.
Okay. And the next one, 25:25.
As cold water to a weary soul, so is good news from a far country.
Okay. What do both of these have in common? Got the added point that it's from a far country in the last one there, but both of them speak with good news or a good word that is there, something that is uplifting, if you will, when that comes along. What does that do?
Refreshes.
Okay, it refreshes. Let me put it this way, kind of draw a parallel. When I get word from various preachers over in the Philippines or from here in this country or whatever else about a number of people baptized or restored or the growth that's taking place in various places around, what does that make us feel like? If we care about the cause of Christ, what does that do?
It's encouraging.
All right.
It makes you want to do more. It strengthens you. It gives you, makes a, like a better term, it gives you life. It gives you
All right.
life.
When I go over there and I see the things accomplished, sometimes in the Philippines, I'll come back and I always call it get my batteries recharged. It's one of those things where you see what's done and it makes you say, hey, you can do these same kind of things and working here as well, and that kind of a positive sense of what goes on in the work is something that is good in that particular way. And that's the point that's being made in these. It brings a sweetness to the soul and health to the bones, as chapter 16, verse 24 is. Always something that's encouraging and edifying about hearing good news, especially in the work of the Lord, as we're involved in that. Anything else there on that one? Okay. In chapter 25 and verse 11, if somebody will read that. Okay, Rhett. And 25 verse 20. Okay, Bo. All right, 25 verse 11, Rhett.
A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver.
All right. And 20.
Like one who takes away a garment in cold weather, and like vinegar on soda, is one who sings songs to a heavy heart.
Okay. When you look at these statements that are here about how you have a good action, like one who takes away a garment in the cold weather, that's not nice, right? We understand that in that cold wind out there tonight. And like vinegar on soda, what happens when you mix those two? You know, you go crazy. Everybody made their volcano back in grade school, I'm sure. Like that is one who sings songs to a heavy heart. In other words, here's somebody who is weeping or crying. They're in a time of mourning, and we come up there busting out in song and all these kind of things. How's that going to make them feel? Is there anything wrong in singing those songs? Might there be a time for those? Sure.
Probably not appropriate.
Okay. That's not the thing we need to do there. We've talked about several times Job. And Job's friends, when they came to him at first, they just sat in silence with him. And I've always said I thought that was the best job they did the whole time. When they were quiet and were there, it could have been taken as something of just being there to support. Later on, it was obvious, even before they talked, that they were ones who were about to let loose on him with condemnation. But sometimes when you have someone who is sorrowful, going through times of mourning, the best thing we can do is just be there and maybe not say anything. Anybody else like me that you get into those situations where somebody's mourning and you just don't feel like you know what to say? Is there anybody who always knows what to say? Because I really want to talk with you if there is. We all have been at that point where we see, I don't know what to say, and a lot of times we recognize that if we've been through those periods. And so the point is, you don't go in there and do those kind of things at that time. They're not ready to get into that happy party type situation because it's something that's just not appropriate at that time. I think I saw your hand up, Scott.
Well, it goes back to 25 and 11. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold.
Yeah.
I mean, you could list 100 sayings of encouragement, but you got to be able to put them in at the right time to the right people at the right situation.
All right, that's what I wanted to do, is get back to 25:11 there and see that point. A word fitly. That word fitly has to do with something that is the literal sense of it, something that's shortened. Have you ever been down, discouraged, in hardship, and somebody comes and they rattle on for an hour and a half? You know, you're sick, you're in a hospital, and somebody, all this time. One of the things I did when I first started preaching in Nacogdoches, we lived 2 doors down from the hospital where everybody went into when they had to go the hospital, and I told the doctor, I said, I'm not sure how to do this. I'm just moved in. I'm the preacher for a congregation down the street here where we meet. And so I said, would you give me any advice about visiting the sick? And he said, are you serious? And I said, yeah. He said, you're the first preacher that's ever asked me for advice. And he told me, he said, I'll tell you what you do. Don't stay forever, you know. And that was the point. He said, get out of there because these people are sick, you know. Go in, encourage, and then out. And that's the sense that is being talked about here, I think. There has to be that which is fitting. And for fitting to be that which comes from a word of short here, a brief kind of a word is what's needed in that way. Go ahead.
I found a pretty good parallel in Romans 12:15 where it says, rejoice with them that rejoice and weep with them that weep.
That's right. Okay. Those are at different times. Both are correct to do. Anybody else there? Okay. Chapter 16, verse 20. Chapter 16, verse 20.
He who heeds the word wisely will find good, and whoever trusts in the Lord, happy is he.
Okay. So when you listen to the Lord's will, you trust in His will, then what comes out as a result? That kind of one is what? All right, happy, or the word is blessed. That's had there. This is the Hebrew equivalent of what you see in the Beatitudes. The idea of blessed, or blessed as some say it. It's not, a lot of times that's given the synonym as happy. Probably the better way is of looking at that as contented. In other words, that I'm contented. I'm fine with things if I'm of that kind of an attitude. Blessed are those that mourn. How are they blessed or contented when they're mourning? Happy doesn't make sense there when we talk about happy. Happy's a reaction to circumstances. There are good things that happen, we're happy about them. There are bad things that happen, we're sad about them. But the word content or joyful fit in an all-around way. You can be one who's going through difficult times, sickness, sorrow, pain, whatever be there, and yet you can be content and joyful. Why?
Seems like people that are most miserable are the ones that don't know where they came from, don't know why they're here, and have no idea where they're going. With a person who believes in God, they know that even though there's pain, it will cease. That it might look like chaos, but it's not.
That's right.
And that is the distinction between someone who is confused and frustrated about why they're here and someone who's just going through hard times.
Right. Every time you think about the idea of how heaven is presented, a number of the things that are presented to us about heaven to note its appeal are in the negative. You're without dying. You're without pain that is there. All of these things, that you do not have these. A person who recognizes the mourning that comes from the loss of loved ones, or the pain that causes trials to be there, of constant sickness at times. That person, the more he knows that, what does the opposite look like? It gets better. So in a sense, when one recognizes truly where my destiny is, if I am living in the proper sort of way to be right with God, my ultimate destiny is in a place where there's none of these bad things. Instead, there's all of these good things. And there's the total absence of those things like death and pain and so forth. And so we look at that, and that's one of the things that bolsters us to go onward in living in a way to go towards heaven. Anything else there? All right, last two on this first point. Chapter 15, verse 13 and 22, 11. Verse 15, 13. Who will take that one? Kai? Okay. And then 22, 11. Go ahead. Clayton. All right, Kai.
A merry heart makes a cheerful countenance, but by spirit of the heart, the spirit is broken. By sorrow of the heart.
Okay. All right, and chapter 22, verse 11. Clayton.
He who loves purity of heart and has grace on his lips, the king will be his friend.
Okay. All right, there, that idea not only of a heart that is, I guess you'd say, cheerful, as in chapter 15, 13, but also a heart is pointed out in chapter 22, verse 11, that's pure. So there's this attitude of blessedness or having been brought to a good place, a merry heart, and then that sense of the purity of his life, of his speech, and so forth, that he lives according to the will of God. All right, I want you to turn to your questions real quick, and what we'll do is leave the second point to next week, but I want to deal with these questions that have that first part involved in it. All right, number 3. What is good news from a far country like, according to 25:25? Like what?
Cold water to a weary soul.
All right, that cold water to a weary soul. Number 4, what kind of words are sweet to the soul? Chapter 16, verse 24. All right, pleasant words are of that time. Number 5, in trying to encourage downtrodden hearts, see chapter 12, verse 25, why should we be careful with our words? Why should we be? What will a good word do? Make the heart glad or help it? How about the opposite?
It needs to be timely and appropriate.
Okay. Timely and appropriate, that point we made about a word fitly spoken. With this, if you might put a little side note there, also seen in this very same question are chapter 25, verse 11, and chapter 25, verse 20. And those are the ones talking about a word fitly spoken and so forth that are from there. But the idea has to do with these things of the right sort of words encourage, the wrong sort of reaction to them or coming to them is going to cause the very opposite effect. Not, excuse me, not encouraged, but discouraged. Anybody got anything there? Okay. Number 6. Can a cheerful heart become a habit instead of a momentary reaction? I think we understand yes to that. Chapter 15, verse 15 has something on that. How does it do that? There it has that one with a merry heart has a continual feast. Go ahead.
Well, your attitude about circumstances is where the true happiness is. And it's not about, your attitude about your life. It's not about what the circumstances are. It's about how you approach it.
Have you ever seen anybody in a hospital bed in dire straits and you come in and they tell you a joke? And you leave, you're the one encouraged, and you'd come in to encourage them. I've seen that over and over again. People that have that kind of a spirit about them, that have that show of they're going to be fine. They're more concerned about you than they are about them. And that's the kind of thing that this reminds me of. That kind of person has an attitude that's not based on what it is that they're going through, like Mary talked about, the circumstances that are there. They've made up their mind that they're going to be helpful to people regardless. And that's more of a state of mind than it is an ability that comes from physical things. It's easy to just get back and mope and cry and do whatever else about difficult times. That's the easiest way to react to them. But the way that we need to react is we're living as Christians. We have a job to do. We have work to do. We can bring that good news. That's what the gospel means to other people. And so we continue to do that. All right. Anything else there? All right. Flip your page over here. Number 7. What 2 attitudes towards God will create a glad heart? Proverbs 16:20. Number 1, heeding the word of God. Heeding it wisely, it's stated. And then verse 2, trusting in the Lord. Can you do one without the other? Can you heed the word wisely without trusting God? Turn that around. Can you trust God but not heed His word? Those two go together. That's twins, if you will, that are there that have to be present. When you have one that's going to have a dependence upon the Lord, a trust, as it's talked about here, the main meaning of the word in the New Testament for faith, the word pistis, is a word that simply has to do with that full or complete trust, an absolute kind of a trust that's there. You cannot please God without faith because you have to trust God. But to also trust God means what? All right, you need to obey the will of God. You need to heed what He's saying. Here's the point of 1 John 2, that we know that we know Him if we what? Keep His commandments. So both of those stand together. It's a false dichotomy. Never fall for it to say, okay, which one is more important? Everything God says is important. And so what you have to do is recognize, look, that faith is not more important than anything else. Now, that faith is fundamental. If I'm going to serve God the way that I should, I'm going to have to trust Him first and say, whatever He says is right. That's what I'm going to do. And trust Him to remake my life according to His will. That's what we have to do. But don't ever get on that idea, well, which one is more important? All the guys who have taken the preacher training can tell you, I go in there and try to trip them up on this one for the first 2 or 3 days every time. We'll read a passage, there will be 2 things there. Which of those is most important? And somebody will start down the path, take the bait and go with it. And I'll say, whoops, wait a minute. You know, it doesn't say that. And we'll deal with those kind of things. That's many times how error gets started. There are 2 things out here, but one's more important. No, both of those are necessary. Both of those attitudes of willingness to heed God's word wisely and to trust in the Lord, both of them must be present. All right, 8. Can you hide a sad heart? Somebody tell me, what verse did you turn to for that? Go ahead, Larry.
Proverbs 15:13.
Okay.
Glad heart makes a cheerful countenance, but by sorrow of heart the spirit is broken.
Okay. You've also got, you said 15:13?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I've got. So, what's the answer? Can you hide the sad heart? No, most of the time, but should you try? The point of that is sometimes that heart will be brought down. That's a fact. You aren't condemned by being one who's sad or downtrodden at times, discouraged. That happens from time to time. But when it does, what do we try to do? All right, to get out of there. How? All right. The Lord's most important and others are out there, right? Have you ever noticed that when you start serving somebody else, you don't think so much about what you're doing? That's the thing that causes you to write. You have purpose. There's a function that is there. There's things that you're doing that are going to be helpful in all of those ways. So while we cannot hide a sad heart, I'd say mostly as true, we can cause its continuity to go away faster when we get ourselves back into the matter of working and going to do what the Lord's will is. Let me give you a case in point. Elijah goes and he defeats the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. Then they destroy the prophets of Baal, and Jezebel says, I'm going to kill you. Now, he's just caused fire to come down from heaven by asking God, wiped out not only the sacrifice, but the rocks and everything else around there. All of it was consumed. People could recognize God had power, not Baal. Then he flees, and there he is under a juniper tree saying, well, you might as well take my life. I'm the only one left. What did God do for Elijah? Did he give him a pity party? He said, get back out and work. You need to go and find this one who is to be commissioned as a prophet, Elisha, and you're to go and do these things that are out there. He gave him work to do. That's a good thing for us to think about. When we're at our lowest, start working in some way. Studying, trying to help others, calling, assisting, different things like that. That's a way in which we can make that heart better. Anybody else got that? Anything there? Go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, I constantly gravitate to, on deals like that, to Michael Gorman. And what, how bad can you be when you got what he had? And he would tell me, he'd say, I want to try to help those people that have real problems. And I was going, I remember I was thinking those were real problems. Are you kidding me? But that's the way his attitude was. That's the way he was. Just like you said, he was looking to try to do something for somebody else.
We moved down to Corpus Christi. There was a man who was a quadriplegic, unable to breathe hardly. I mean, every breath was a struggle. And when I was a teenager, he came in. He was an excellent Bible student. And we studied on the book of Revelation, the first 3 chapters especially, and then the throne scene of 4 and 5. We didn't get into the full book, but he wanted to bring some lessons there. That's the most encouraging class I ever had as a teenager. He had to stop and gather that breath and could only speak, and then again like that. But I remember the first class I went home, I got in my bed that night and I cried. And Mom came in and said, what's there? And I said, I hadn't been doing anything. And recognize that kind of courage to go on and work in the spiritual things, even when you're in that kind of a way. Those kind of people have a great help that we need to notice. All right, that last one I'm going to do, number 9. What principles do you see working in Proverbs 22:11? That's what we were talking about before. A pure heart, or we might call that integrity, and what else? Gracious speech are characteristics that are highly valued by God or by others as well who love the Lord. And we need to think about those things being involved. All right. Anything else there? We'll finish the latter half of this up, Lord willing, next time. Who was it? Blaine, I think, will lead us in a word of prayer, and then we'll be dismissed.